Nexus PMG welcomes you to the Bigger Than Us podcast, which we as energy geeks lovingly refer to as the BTU. Bigger Than Us is a podcast that focuses on ideas that will shape the future of our planet and ultimately our existence. We will occasionally lean into energy topics because, after all, it's the key to our collective survival. But we'll also explore other ideas and topics that we believe will have an impact that is bigger than us. And now, on to today's show. Hello and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Nicol Ragland to the show. Influenced and informed by time spent with the indigenous in multiple countries, Ragland continues to engage in a long-term photographic and film exploration into humanity's relationship to culture and the wild, recognizing culture to be an accumulation of ideas where we explore ways of exploring. This infinite play is where she's found the best terrain to collaborate, listen carefully, and recognize expansion due to authoring and co-authoring. In addition, Nicol has founded Regenerate Oklahoma, a statewide soil health initiative that seeks to advance the practices of regenerative agriculture. Nicol, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Raj. Thank you. Glad to be with you.
Nicol, thank you for joining. Nicol, before I get into the topic of regenerative farming, I'd like to explore your background in photography. Can you share with us some of your experiences in photography and the travels you've taken?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up really loving photography, collecting books. I think I'm an inherent observer. I was really quiet as a kid and just was always looking. It was really part of my nature to really watch and collect photography books as a kid growing up, and then took some classes in grade school and high school, and actually ended up studying environmental science at the University of Denver, and got my last few credits actually in Nepal. I was working for the World Wildlife Fund, doing environmental survey work, and all the while really being 22, 23 at the time, and that was my first really third world adventure. And as you and I'm sure many folks listening in, if they've had the opportunity to do so, it's an experience that really takes you out of your comfort zone and your own habitual perception. And instead of doing all the environmental work that I was supposed to be doing, which was tree diversity and seed dispersal and tourist impact, I was taking pictures. All I wanted to do was take pictures. And so it was really my wake up call to incorporating story and imagery and focus on storytelling in relationship to environmental work and environmental stories. And so consequently, I came back to Colorado at the time, and I went to the Art Institute of Colorado for photography. And that was mid 90s, and really focused on, obviously coming from doing environmental work, wanted to do more national and international study. And so, yeah, I ended up working for different nonprofits from here in Oklahoma to Colorado, California, and then all over the world, and doing a lot of work with indigenous communities, and from East Timor to Indonesia to East Africa, India, Southeast Asia. And really, I think focused on telling stories in relation to the art of us and humanity's relationship to the wild and culture, and really our deep connection to place. So yeah, it's been quite a journey, about 20 years now, of telling stories in the environment, and specifically human beings in relation to our connection to culture and place, has really been my love, and quite an adventure for quite some time. Yeah.
Can you share perhaps a story or two regarding, human beings' connection to place?
Yeah. I was really blessed to spend time with a tribe in East Africa called the Hadzabe. And they're one of the last remaining tribes of hunter-gatherers, certainly in Africa, but definitely in the world. And have a direct link to original human beings 50,000 years ago, and particularly in this area. And I was lucky enough to get there at a time when there wasn't so much encroachment on this particular tribe, of a lot of tourism, as you can imagine, with the Maasai and different pastoralists in the region. And I had spent several weeks. We were camping with them and playing charades and sitting around a fire and singing and sharing granola bars and hunting and gathering, and a lot of walking and listening and really learning that particular culture. And consequently, I was working with a friend on the ground there who's from there, and he's fluent in Swahili. They speak Hadzani, their native language, but several speak Swahili. And my friend Ethan was translating for me. And we were sitting once with an elder, and believe it or not, someone from the Tanzanian government thought it would be a good idea to take one of these elders, or suggest to an elder to be part of an archery tournament in South Korea. And this gentleman said, sure, yeah, I'll go to South Korea. And, I just want to remind you that these are people that, they own nothing. They share everything. They move camps based on kills. There's no please and thank you in their language, because everything is around sharing and really collective living. And they're hunters. And so when I would see 4-year-olds that could, shoot birds 200 feet out of trees, it was just exquisite. Completely in touch with nature, and just really extraordinary group of people. And so this gentleman said, yeah, I'll go to South Korea and participate in this archery contest. And so I'm thinking to myself, my God, South Korea, first world of trains and neon signs and cell phones and cars. And you can't imagine the culture shock. And so I said to him through my friend Ethan, I said, what did you see? And he just gave this long, beautiful elder pause. And he said, I didn't understand why everyone had their own plate of food. And
Wow.
and it completely stripped me of my own first world, conditioning of consumption and all that I know in the first world. And I said, is that it? He was like, yeah, that's it. I just didn't understand. And it was so telling, and just, a realization that that's where we once were, of a direct line of total sharing, knowing exactly where your food came from, and living off the land. So yeah, that was a huge
That
moment.
that really is
Yeah.
amazing. I took the note down here: own nothing and share
Mm.
everything.
Yeah. Yeah. No concept of ownership.
I mean,
Yeah.
right? That really is
Yeah.
fascinating. Now, on your travels, did you ever feel unwelcome?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Different parts of the world, different cultures. Not everyone comes in understanding their impact, and that's something that I, after many travels, really thought about in myself. Like, how am I making a difference or influencing an area or region? How am I being sensitive and really considerate in relation to this particular place? I ate baboon with the Hadzabi. That's something I never, yeah,
Oh,
which is just shocking to this day. But in consideration of their particular culture, that was a huge feast. It's a massive kill for them to actually kill a baboon, and so to participate in that feast is in consideration of their culture and celebration of their culture. So, there's always a question: how do you enter? Knowing and doing enough research and listening, really listening and learning and building relationship and singing songs and figuring out really our commonalities that can transcend differences in language and culture. And ultimately that's the beautiful part, is if you can get to that place that really is, shared understanding between us. Yeah.
It really is. I mean, they say when you free yourself from knowing your history, your past, you're open to all different kinds of new ideas. And I feel like that's kind of what you did when you entered these different indigenous peoples, tribes, and areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's always the challenge. I mean, they say we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. And that's what I love so much about being a documentarian, whether I'm documenting a farm in Minnesota or going into East Africa to learn about a tribe. I mean, I could certainly have an idea about a particular story based on my own conditioning, based on my reading, based on teachers, it goes on and on. Or I can go in completely open hearted and open minded in order to really, really listen. And I did have another interesting story. I worked with a group called the Dorobo Fund. There was a gentleman called Dowdy Peterson who was actually asked by the tribe, many members of the tribe of the Hadzabe in Tanzania, to help them basically create an allotment of land from the Tanzanian government in order for them to maintain their practice of hunting and gathering. And I had asked my partner if I could connect with him because I had a handful of images and I wanted to try and make a difference. And I had a very naive and romantic idea about this particular tribe. I was enamored by their way of life, of owning nothing and sharing everything. And I sat down with him, and native to Tanzania and just a really phenomenal human being. And I heard him say in Swahili to my partner, and I was picking up just a little bit of Swahili. I don't know it at all. It's a difficult language, but I could pick up his intonation and what he was saying. And he turned to my partner on the ground and he said, I don't have a whole lot of time for another Mzungu that wants to change the world. And Mzungu is white person. And I felt it and I knew it. And my partner, told me what he had said afterwards. And I've always really thought about that because, again, we can come in as a very privileged white member of the United States and have an idea of, changing the world of East Africa through a tribe, or we can listen and learn and recognize the fact that, there's a lot of the Western world that is helping, bicycles, getting them to hospitals and medical care. And I mean, there's so many things that are indicative of the truth on the ground. And so, that was a really confronting and a really important experience that I hold true to my heart to this day.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And you mentioned changing the world and farms in Minnesota. I'd like to switch gears here. How did you get involved in regenerative farming?
Yeah, so I was connected actually through my godfather, who's a functional medicine doctor, to another functional medicine doctor called Dr. Zach Bush. He's triple board certified in endocrinology, metabolism, hospice, and palliative care. Really brilliant man, and had been doing a lot of cancer research. And was doing some work out of rural Virginia and had a control group that he was focused on in studying cancer. And he put them all on a high alkaline diet, many of which actually got even worse. And so he and his team went into our food system and said, what's going on in our food system? And he came to the conclusion of a lot of detriment of these chemicals and primarily glyphosate. Glyphosate is the culprit that's the main toxin that's in Roundup, very commonly used, and really has been the major player involved in the rise in all these epidemics, really from the mid-90s of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, ADHD. It goes on and on, autism. And much of which within functional medicine, as well as a lot of our medical practitioners are speaking to these days, is the importance of the microbiome, and that these diseases essentially are high inflammation. And so Zach had an idea of doing a film, and so he and I and his wife Jen and our team basically did a drive down the Mississippi River. He initially wanted to do water testing down the Mississippi River. But like every documentary, and what I was mentioning in terms of going in and having an idea of a story, that story really shifted once we started learning the farmers, and specifically in the Midwest. So much of what we're dealing with in terms of the dead zone off the coast of Louisiana has to do with agricultural runoff. And so we just started learning kind of the truth of what's happening within our food system, and the pressure of the use of chemicals for our farmers, and really what was happening to them, and consequently our land and our watersheds. And so we put together a film called Farmer's Footprint that was released a few years ago, and it's a 20-minute short film. Folks can watch it online at farmersfootprint.us. And since then, it's been turned into a nonprofit. And having so many people around me dealing with chronic diseases, and not having grown up with hearing about cancer hardly at all, and now every time I turn around, it's just a common disease, as well as, like I said, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. It's just skyrocketing. And I think it really is instigating a lot of people to ask questions. What is happening, and what is the direct correlation, and what are we eating and drinking and breathing, and how can we individually and collectively make a difference within our food system? And so yeah, that was really the beginning. And then ever since, I've been shooting stories from Black farming here in Oklahoma to folks in Kansas, Texas. I spent a month in Australia shooting for a group called RCS, really extraordinary group that have been working for 30 years. I think between 8,000 farmers, really transitioning their land from conventional farming to regen. Really extraordinary model of bringing farmers together to create collective groups to help in that process of transitioning. And so learned a lot in Australia, and then consequently have moved back to my family's ranch here in Oklahoma about 3 years ago, and have found the soil health ambassadors here in Oklahoma, and recently started a soil health initiative called Regenerative Oklahoma. So that's been the process really in the last 3 years.
And what are your hopes for the initiative Regenerate Oklahoma?
The hopes and the mission and real intention is to bridge consumers to farmers, to create really unprecedented statewide media and education to consumers to understand why soil health matters, what the direct line is from soil health to human health, to hyper localize our food system so that people have a direct link to knowing who their regenerative producers are, as well as building out really strong regenerative agribusiness in the state, and direct markets. We've got several organizations in the state. Noble Research Institute is doing phenomenal work on education for grazing lands. The Conservation Commission, the Conservation District, the Grazing Land Coalition are really the bigger statewide organizations, but we're really focused on reaching consumers and getting stories out there, and really detailed, intimate stories of the truth of what farmers are shouldering through, and the pressures they feel from the government, from the chemical industry, and really supporting them by creating local markets so that people have a direct reach to chemical-free regenerative food.
And how are you getting the message out to the ears and eyes of consumers?
Yeah, so obviously being a photographer and filmmaker, image and intimate, honest, vulnerable stories of these farmers to consumers is really potent. And so through creating short films, photo essays, short stories, through social media, newsletters, one of my goals is just hero billboards across the state so people know names and faces of who producers are, where they're located, their specific story. So consumers really feel a direct line in knowing their farmer. That's part of our goal.
And have you seen any inbound interest since you started the initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. I think by virtue of the fact that all of us are shouldering through this pandemic, there's one of the gifts of COVID. Many of the farmers that had a direct market in place, their market went up 500% in 2020. And
Wow.
so I think, yeah, because really in dealing with sickness anyway, coupled with the pandemic, people are really asking questions of where does my food come from? And really also too because of the bottlenecks of the food system that really revealed themselves in cold storage and distribution, and getting food to consumers has obviously been challenging. And so we're going to have to really hyper localize anyway. We might as well be creating clean, chemical free, hyper local markets. So yeah, there definitely is interest, and farmers markets are just really on the rise, which is really exciting. And yeah, there definitely is very strong interest for sure.
Now, the crux of our conversation is the why behind what you do. You mentioned your conversation with Dr. Zach Bush. What about that conversation, just really drew your interest where you decided to devote so much energy into Regenerate Oklahoma and sharing these stories?
I think learning there's so many people in this space, and with different skill sets. There's geomorphologists and soil scientists, and obviously farmers and ranchers, and so many folks that I've connected to across the country and internationally are saying, what's really missing is truly changing the narrative, and that obviously I believe in film. I believe in the power of film. It's the most powerful way of getting a message out there, and we've got to get this out to the masses, and making the direct connectivity to the microbiome within our soil, directly to the microbiome within our own human system, is really kind of the aha moment, and connecting the dots within rural communities, obviously in cities as well. But I think so much of my work is creating a connectivity between rural and urban communities. In addition to, like, the United States spends more on healthcare than any other developed country in the world. We're leading in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and autoimmune disease and cancer, and recognizing that the solution to that is regenerating our soil and creating that connectivity from soil health in relation to human health. We know what to do. The solution is there. I think, we're dealing with so many draconian powers, and all of which can feel very abstract and disconnected. And so coming back to Oklahoma and finding a place that is more land heavy and very community driven and handshake driven and trust driven, and it's a place where people make deals based on handshake and trust. And so I think coming back here and recognizing such a massive issue collectively, and recognizing that that is our common ground, and then finding the major soil health ambassadors across the state and saying, okay, we could actually make a difference in one particular state by virtue of the fact that it is community driven, that we are land heavy, and people are really waking up to our food system.
You mentioned sharing the story, sharing the narrative, and you and I both know that there are billions of dollars invested in maintaining the narrative. What are some of the challenges you've come across or seen in changing the narrative?
That we are feeding the world. This all really happened really at the beginning of the Green Revolution, and this idea that if we were to use these chemicals, we could, our yields would rise, we would make money significantly faster, and all of this would be feeding the world. That is completely false. There's a famine in sub-Saharan Africa as we speak. Millions of people are starving. We're not feeding them. And we're not feeding them because we don't have the political infrastructure to do so. Clean food, whether it's organic or in best case scenario, regenerative, is all grown on 5 acres or less. So, we're trapped in a system that, for people to really understand, 40% of our food is wasted. Less than 1% of our farmers are eating their own food. I mean, say that twice. Just that alone just really reveals the insanity of our food system. States like Kansas, of which is 90% farmland, is importing 90% of their food. Monsanto recently sold to Bayer. Monsanto owned 80% of our global food chain. They sold to Bayer for something around $68 billion, which is really, if you really think about it, not a lot of money in comparison to that level of power. And, a really important point is the fact that, why would a company like Monsanto, that essentially has taken out all of the nutrients of our plants, sold to a German company called Bayer, that sells medicine? And that to me is really an issue of homeland security. And so again, it's just, there is billions of dollars in this space, and the issue is bringing it back home from state to state for each of us individually to be part of changing the narrative of creating hyper-local, healthy food systems. So we're certainly up against a lot, but what I do see is that, like I said before, I mean, the question and the issue of dealing with so many of these diseases and now a pandemic, we're wanting to reconnect to just our own relationship to what we put in our bodies. Absolutely.
Can you expand on that statistic? Less than 1% of farmers are eating their own food.
Yeah, I mean, we're not growing food. We're growing, plastic and corn that's not edible, and soybeans, and, and sometimes meat that's sold overseas that we then buy back. I mean, it's crazy. And so the problem is really this culture of convenience as well as cheap food, and really understanding the cascading effects of what cheap food means. And that's part of the problem as well in terms of the narrative, because, if we had stronger markets and more farmers were actually producing this clean food, those prices would then go down. And so, again, that is going to take all of us, for consumers, to build more demand and to get creative in building out stronger markets in order for this food to be less expensive. So, yeah, I mean, it's an industrial complex, right? And so we're not in a place of growing food. That's part of the problem. But like I said, I mean, true clean food is grown on 5 acres or less. So there's no shortage of land. There's shortage of demand as well as labor. Labor's definitely part of our challenge that we're working on as well.
So speaking of true clean food and demand, if you had a magic wand, let's fast forward to 2030, what would you like to see regenerative farming look like?
Oh, mainstream, a common term. People would understand it. They would see brands that would have a regenerative label on it. We would see scanners on our phone that would show nutrient density specific to each carrot that we walk through a grocery store. We would know exactly what's in that carrot and where it came from. We would see a drop in these diseases. We would recognize that schools and shifts in these mental issues that we're dealing with and behavior issues with kids would be changing. Yeah, we'd recognize the direct correlation between our health and our farms and our food, but really, really having it be mainstream, really beyond organic. Absolutely.
And when you're speaking to farmers to enroll them into thinking regeneratively, what do those conversations look like?
It really varies. I think the important thing is to meet farmers where they are. No one wants to be told what to do. I certainly don't want to be told what to do or shamed in any way. It's really important to all of us that there's a deep respect and reverence to farmers. I certainly have it. Everyone on my team has it. We're working directly with farmers themselves, and gently and sensitively. Farmers have done the best that they could have done thus far, and much of this is based on succession and doing what their fathers did and what their grandfathers did and grandmothers, and it's been passed down, and it's deep seated. It's as deep as religion, these beliefs in relation to how they work their land. And again, it can be an invasive thing to say, we're bringing a new idea to you and we'd like you to change your operation. And so part of the challenge is creating economic incentives, growing food, growing crops that can really change their numbers is really important. And again, that's going to take shareholders and CEOs of different companies, people getting creative to be part of the farming community, investing in farms, investing in land. We in Oklahoma, we've got a rise. I think it's like 1,200% in foreign land ownership. So we need companies really caring about local land and empowering local farmers. And economically, understandably. I mean, I think Oklahoma is really one of the top states that's dealing with major bankruptcies. So what does it look like within a state for people to say, I want to care about our farmers and our land and keep things local and build out markets locally?
Well, I appreciate that. And I know you said nobody likes to be told what to do. But my last question is this, is that if you could share some advice, words of wisdom, recommendations with the audience, and it doesn't have to be specifically to regenerative farming, it could be more broadly speaking, what would it be?
I think that the most powerful way to change is to listen and not to know. Like I said, that's our approach when we connect with farmers, and I think it's a rule of thumb anyway, just as a human being. And in this case, in relationship to regenerative agriculture and farming, is to know your farmer. There's a direct link within each of us individually and our well-being simply by knowing where your food comes from and supporting those that are creating chemical-free, nutrient-dense, regenerative food, as well as stewarding the land. I myself have just become just so respectful of farmers and their effort and their tenacity and shouldering through change in climate and being just so incredibly resilient through what they've had to work through within our food system and industrial complex, as well as now a new, completely different invitation to creating regenerative agriculture and what that looks like.
I appreciate that. And before we go, I'd like to leave the audience with this. While I was researching for the show, I came across this quote by Wendell Berry. People are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food, which I think is very, very illustrative of our conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Wendell's incredible. He also has another short and sweet one, which is like, if you eat, you're into agriculture.
Nicole, yeah. I like that. I appreciate that. And I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thank you so much. Glad to be with you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. And you can show your support by sharing our show with a friend or reach out to us on social media, where you'll find us under our Nexus PMG handle. If there's a subject or topic you'd like to hear about, send me an email, btu@nexuspmg.com, or contact me via our website, nexuspmg.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, where we share what we're reading and thinking about in the clean tech, green tech sectors. Bigger Than Us is a Nexus PMG production.